people that are traumatised, that perhaps lived with it for decades, a domestic abuse experience, health ruptured in a moment. If there was any morsels of shame, I was finding them and going, I'll have some more of that.
Welcome back to another episode of Superwoman Isn't Real. And today we have such a treat for you. We have Anna Pinkerton joining us for a really in-depth chat about some things that actually I just think are just so perfect for this podcast to cover. So Anna is a trauma specialist. She is an author of 2 books, but I've got My Kind of Life in front of me here, which we'll be diving into. And she's also a leadership development coach. And I know she works with lots of interesting people all over the world. Mm-hmm. And she'll be sharing some of that with us today. But Anna, thank you so much for joining us today and
Thank you.
Covering this very broad topic of, I mean, we've heard the word trauma a lot, I think, in the last few years. And I want to actually unpick it a little bit and get to what it actually is. And it varies for each individual, what that word means, I guess. Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your journey. So how does someone end up becoming a trauma specialist? Because it's a big title and it's a big topic to be focused on.
It is. I mean, I'm in my 30th year.
Wow.
I know, I don't look it. No, I started studying trauma in 1993. I was at university as a mature student, and I decided that I would go to America and do my clinical side of my therapy training there. And I studied at the University of California Medical Center, and somebody there told me about this thing called trauma. And of course, 99% of the children and families on the hospital ward had been through some kind of trauma. So that's where my interest first started, because I realized that actually at the time, 30 years ago, we weren't talking about trauma like we do now. No. And I had this thought in my head that there's actually a lot of wounded people that are trying to manage everyday life. And that just fascinated me. But also I felt really, really passionate about how do we heal wounds that can't easily be seen, but they do devastate lives. And so that's where my interest started. And I've studied it ever since. I still feel like I'm studying it really, although I call it a specialism. That's just because that's been a focus for a long time.
You actually just summed that up so beautifully. A wound that cannot be seen. I feel like that, when I was saying let's demystify the idea of trauma a little bit. Because it is spoken about a lot now, but in different contexts, I feel. So some people are referring to childhood trauma, other people are dealing with the loss of a parent. I guess there are degrees of trauma, aren't they? Things that...
Kind of, but the brain doesn't think so. Right. So true trauma is when something, either a one-off event is completely and utterly overwhelming to all your prior resources and resiliences, or there's been a drip build of smaller incidents, adversities that stack up over months and years, and then finally the brain ruptures and that tips into trauma. At the moment, we use trauma here and there, kind of willy-nilly, really. I think sometimes people are using trauma to mean drama. Yes. So true trauma is a neurological condition where the person's system, every system of the body is overwhelmed. So it can't happen in a half-hearted way. So in terms of a spectrum, you can't have a mini trauma.
Thank you. That really helps me. No, it does, because I think when we're just hearing the word, it's very hard to understand who's in true trauma and who's in a different sort of state, but maybe using that word incorrectly. So we've got to be, I guess, careful with how we use the word.
I think so. I think what happens when we're trying to accommodate some knowledge is that the word will change, like many words we don't use anymore because we've educated ourselves about it. In the last 10 to 15 years, particularly in the UK, we've tried to understand trauma more. So now it's slightly being diluted. But the good side of that is people that are traumatized, that perhaps lived with it for decades, are actually getting help that they need.
Yeah. So you became a trauma specialist, and to how many years did you work in that sort of field? And because now you are also a leadership development coach. So
Yeah.
how did that sort of shift come around?
Well, I've never left the trauma behind because it's at the back of a lot of what CEOs, entrepreneurs and directors go through.
Yeah.
So there's almost always there's a trauma behind what they've come to work on. The evolution of my own came from a personal experience of, I can laugh at it now. I specialised in post-traumatic stress disorder, and then 12 years ago ended up with it, just over 12 years now. And it was the biggest event of my life and also the biggest shame of my life as well, because I didn't see it coming. And that was through a domestic abuse experience. And so I just kind of woke up to this terrific bunch of symptoms. My mental health ruptured in a moment. It says it in the book, literally.
You're so open about it, and thank you for being so open, because I read about it again in the book, and it was like, wow.
It was a tricky one. I really didn't really want to do my personal story, but when I had some coaching and some support before I wrote the book, and I said to them, I don't really want it to be about me. I want it to be about the people that I support to move through their trauma. And then they went, but if you don't share that, then they won't see you as an expert.
Absolutely. I think it's one of those things, like you said, you can study it and you can be around people that have gone through it. But when you've gone through it, your relatability and I guess the way you probably coach today is enriched in a different way.
Oh, totally. Totally. And what's really interesting now is clients from around the world will just look at me in the eye and say, this has happened to you, hasn't it? Wow. So it won't be the same type of trauma, but that's what I was saying earlier, is that the once the trauma's there, the brain acts in quite a similar way. Yeah. There's a set of kind of symptoms, and obviously everybody's constellation of symptoms is different. But a trauma from domestic abuse could easily seem like a war trauma or from an accident. There'll be features that are slightly different, but the symptoms checklist, if you like, is similar.
I'd love to know your symptoms checklist, because it might be that people are listening with not realising that they might be going through something or have something like the drip, 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 drip effect.
Yeah.
What were your symptoms like? Because like you said, your mental health ruptured in a second. What does that look and feel like?
Oh my gosh, nobody's ever asked me that question. It's a rarity actually, because there's two things about it. People aren't keen really to talk about trauma, and they're certainly not keen to talk about domestic abuse trauma, right? So an assault in an intimate relationship or coercive control, although we are looking at talking about that topic a little bit more, it's not common and it's not easy to talk about for people. So appreciate you asking. My symptoms, the rupture for me was just after the forensic photographer left, and I thought, this is the lowest part of my life. I'm still in my pajamas from the night before, so I'm now 16 hours, I think, in pajamas from the night before, because I'd fled to my mother's house with my children. Having been thrown across the bedroom. Wow. So I was injured, and the photographer came to take pictures of the injuries. And I went to have a lie down, and then suddenly, no chance of sleeping or anything, but I just suddenly just didn't feel like myself anymore. Wow. It just went, it was almost like, you know how you might tear a muscle or something? It felt like that, but inside. And then I thought, I could barely function. I couldn't sleep for more than an hour at a time for 6 months. I could barely eat. I'd be retching. I had really fast thoughts going through my mind like a sped up movie. And it was just hundreds of little scenes. And I can remember having to hold the worktop in the kitchen because I was going to be sick because of the speed of the images. So it was like, I realised, oh, right, this is what trauma's like then. When you're in it.
You were in it.
You're in such neurological disarray. And it made me really humble, because hopefully I'd helped clients prior to my being ill, but to know it from the inside, to actually say to somebody, put a brave face on it, pull yourself together. Not that I did that as a therapist, but the world says that to people. It's been 6 months now, you should be feeling better. Yeah. These people have no control of their neurological disarray. Yeah. And I used to shake from head to foot. I used to have a tic where I'd keep touching my face.
Wow, yeah, you mentioned
that was so weird. Like, that was the first time I'd ever told anybody about that I did. And it was like, actually my skin was kind of numb. My skin on my face was kind of numb, but I was hyper sensitive to cold. I was freezing cold all the time. Wow. I couldn't stand cold water on my hands. Yeah, I mean, I probably can't remember what the symptoms.
I'm sure some of it you'd blocked out. And I guess the reason why I asked that question, and thank you for answering it so beautifully, is just so that, like you said, there is a culture of, and I don't know if we're more guilty of this in the UK, we probably are, pull yourself together, get on with it. And unless you're trained in it, or you've been around somebody that's been, we've had someone educate you on this a little bit, you might say that without meaning anything by it. You might say that because that's kind of the attitude and of your family or whatever upbringing you've had, and it can be so harmful and not the right thing to say. Yeah. So actually just making people aware of some of the things maybe to look out for. It's not something you're just going to wake up and pull yourself together with. Like you said, you developed a tic. It's not something you're just going to shake off.
No.
And so it's really helpful.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, friends of mine, very, very close friends of mine, didn't ask me how I was, and then later apologise for, I didn't ask you for 5 years how you were, thinking that you were okay and recovered. And it's taken me a very, very long time to recover myself.
How long has it been now?
12 years, just over. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a really, really great point. How does somebody help somebody? What's the right questions to ask, and when?
Do you know what? I think that they're not asking, first of all, comes from actually quite a kind place. We've become, we're so concerned about people being in pain that when we're not asking them, we're really wanting them to not be in pain. Yeah. So I always think, try not to worry about it. If you don't know what to say, just go and say, I don't know what to say. Yeah. That's all you have to do. How are you?
That's really helpful, though.
Yeah,
that's
just,
really
I don't know what to say.
No.
Yeah.
You can just have it in the back of your mind if you know you're about to go help somebody, but you don't know how to approach it at all.
Exactly. And of course you give that, if you say, I don't know what to say, you then give that person the opportunity to put the boundary around it themselves. Like, if I was in the frame of mind to want to talk to somebody, I'd go, well, yeah, this is how I am, or I'm doing better, thanks for asking. And you kind of gently close it down if you're not in the mood. So people will, if you say, I don't know what to say, they'll help you with it.
Yeah. And you touched on something which is another big topic. I'm sure we won't dive into all of it today, but you mentioned shame when you first brought this topic up.
Yeah. Shame is crippling. So humiliation is a natural emotion, but humans hate it because humans are weakened by humiliation, rightly so. Because if you're in a public place, let's say, or even amongst a small group of people, and something humiliates you, you're immediately less resilient. You can't find your resources inside, and that's why people use bullish behaviour to demean and diminish people, because it does genuinely weaken their resources. It doesn't make them weak, it's a human response, but that is what happens. They're weakened by it. What happens with shame is where the humiliation is then turned against self. So you internalize the humiliating experience as though it's something about you, which is what I did, which was, you absolute idiot. I didn't say it as politely as that in my head, but I called myself names. I told myself I'd never recover. I made bad decisions. I've ruined my children's lives. I've ruined my life. We've lost our family home. Blah, it just went on.
Spirals and spirals.
And shame just loves more shame. So I was consumed by it. And also I was embarrassed because I was a psychotherapist. I was a trauma specialist. I should have known better. I should have not known was coming. I should have read the signs better. I mean, if there was any morsels of shame, I was finding them and going, "Oh, I'll have some more of that," kind of thing.
It's exactly what you said, shame loves more shame. There's so many like things that are hitting home, Anna, because it's exactly that. It's like once you start spiraling, and you have to very consciously stop and pull yourself out of it. You've got to be in that state of, I'm stopping now.
Yeah.
Otherwise it goes on and on. And we've all been in those cycles and hard times in our life. And yes, and that leads me on to inner brutality, because that feeds into inner brutality, which is a whole phrase that I now know about because I've read the book, that I'd never heard before. I've never heard I've heard like the inner critic, I've heard other things, but I've never heard inner brutality. But it really is brutal. It's brutal. Exactly.
It's brutal and it's inside. Yes. So that's why I coined the frame inner brutality, because I thought this is more than an inner critic. This isn't a voice that's critiquing my behavior. This is a voice that is getting my head and holding me underwater and saying, you're not coming up and you will die with this shame. That's how it felt. Wow. And I thought if I tell myself 100 times a day, I'll never forgive myself, I'll never shake off this shame, then I won't recover ever.
Yeah.
I realized that. I just stood up one day and I'm never going to recover unless I say, where does this pendulum swing the other way? Yeah. And what is that? If it's not this, which is this brutality, this inner brutality, it's got what's the exact opposite? And that's where I thought, well, it's kindness, isn't it? And I came up with the other term, companionability. So I call it kindness and companionability, so that it's a dynamic relationship with self, not just compassion, which is passive. Yeah. Like I can have compassion for other people on the other side of the world who are going through terrible things every single day. That's a compassion, but I can't be companionable. I understand. Right? Yeah. So I think companionability, to be a companion to somebody, to be a companion to self, is really dynamic. Yeah. It requires you to act. Yes. It requires you to be in a different relationship.
And I think that's really important, because as human beings, we are dynamic. And I've touched on this on other podcasts. You can, exactly what happened to you, right? Like you were thriving, life was together, you were a trauma specialist, and then you found yourself in a completely different situation. Life is constantly moving and evolving. And where we are today is not necessarily where we're, people can think, I've conquered wellness, I've conquered my mindset, I've conquered how I'm feeling. I know I can be, that will never happen to me. And actually, to the point of being dynamic, life is constantly evolving, changing, challenging us, and we have to remain very dynamic as individuals to to cope, survive.
The job's never done, sadly. Job's never done. It isn't ever done. It's like work-life balance doesn't actually exist. No. Right? I call it work-life balancing.
Yes.
You're balancing all of the time and there's no line. You have to be in relationship with self continuously. Balancing. Right, so it's sad for people, because they go, oh, if I just get the blueprint of staying well and being in good relationship with myself and the world and healthy,
absolutely,
that they think there's the line. There isn't.
There isn't. It's an everyday job. It's an hour by hour task, actually.
It is.
When you really want to break it down, or checking in with yourself.
But that's very hard to do if you've got a high level of inner brutality, because the inner brutality wants to go against what's good for you.
Let's put inner brutality in real context, I guess, now, because now that you're working with, I guess, high achievers, CEOs, talk us through how it shows up. Because somebody like, they might be very defensive. Well, I don't have that. That doesn't apply to me. And actually it shows up in different ways, doesn't it? And your book covers how it can show up. Yeah. So a lot about this podcast, for instance, is about ditching perfectionism, because perfectionism held me back for a very long time.
Well, it's inner brutality, right?
Inner brutality.
That's one of the ways it shows up.
Exactly. But you wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if 2 years ago I could have drawn that line.
No.
I don't know that I could have. I can today, but I couldn't have done that 2 years ago. So it's really useful to see how it shows up, so that people can maybe identify. Yeah. Actually, I've been doing that to myself for years.
So it shows, in terms of the pervasive culture in society, it shows up as self-sabotage, low self-esteem, imposter syndrome, perfectionism, low self-worth, So those are the kind of broader terms for it. In terms of how it shows up on a kind of small level, like that would be you never get the success that you want. You live in a zone of potential for a really long time, but you never kind of get out of potential. You just feel like there's this reservoir of something within you that never gets tapped into. So that can lead to depression and anxiety, unfulfillment. I've worked with many multimillionaires who on paper look like they ought to be successful, but they can't enjoy it. So the inner brutality shows up there. You don't deserve what you've got. It should be better. So you might have a company with 100 million turnover, but it should be 350. And it's like nothing is ever enough. But the reality is you feel never enough and never okay. And often it comes down to even that person just feeling safe. So it's not usually a frame of mind. It's come from a very deep experience that's not been felt through.
Wow.
So inner brutality is really a smokescreen. It's a way that the brain has protected itself from very, very deep pain and often trauma.
Wow. And of the people that you work with, and I'm sure you've worked with lots of, like you said, on paper, successful people.
Yeah.
Are there any strands that are common and recurring? Or is it always,
Very, very common. Yeah, like I was saying, 99% of the people I work with are incredibly clever, high intellect, very driven, and they're very, very good at doing what doesn't look after them. So they've got this incredible propensity to override what they need. So, which is something that they think is their drive, but it's usually the inner brutality that's driving that. So, and a big fear for them is, well, if I get rid of the inner brutality, where does my drive and desire come from? But it just comes from a more pure place, which doesn't use up so much energy.
And you can still be success is a loose word, but you can still be successful taking away the parts that are crippling you every single day, right?
Absolutely.
Is that society that teaches us? I mean, where does this come from, this idea that to be driven, we have to work 12-hour days and we have to drive ourselves into the ground and we come last? And
it's a tricky one. You've got a familial culture, so where we're brought up. So we've got our parents, our caregivers, other family members. So the familial culture has a particular narrative for all of us. Then that familial culture, you come out of there into a community culture, a societal culture, a country culture, right? And there's narratives of multiple levels. By the time you're in your mid-20s, you've had your familial culture and your beliefs really, really imprinted and wired in, so that you believe that's who you are. So if you've been brought up to think that it's a 16-hour day is ordinary, it's very, very difficult to wire that out. But it's not impossible, and that's the work that I do with people.
Work that needs to be done.
And the inner brutality takes a certain percentage of your energy straight away. So if you deal with that, because that is something that's created inside, it gives you more personal power to then get out and do what you want to do from a more pure place. When I say pure, I mean a place that takes less energy.
And look, I'm not saying I'm there at all. So perfectionism is something I've always struggled with. Giving myself permission to, even though this is my company, giving myself permission to log off at 3:00 to pick up my daughter from school, I will then often log in straight away again at home because some of these things that you've talked about, applying, like linking the dots, and it's actually like, well, no, you don't deserve to have this time. Now you need to work. You need to work for the fact that you just picked her up and put that time back in. And it's hardwired. It's not easy to get rid of that.
It is hardwired, but it's not as hard as we think it is. It's just that we spend every day reinforcing it 100 times a day. So when we go, right, let's pick up the child, open the laptop again, that's so on autopilot, but it's training the brain that you can do it. So I always say to entrepreneurs, CEOs, that don't give yourself a hard time that you're on the verge of burnout, because actually, effectively, your brain has been trained that you can manage the 12 to 16 hour days.
Yeah.
Because up till now you have, but you don't get away with it. It will come somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's what burnout is it's the body and the mind has to create something to make you slow down or stop. And that's a very cruel reality, because that's a 6 month to 2 year recovery.
Yes, and it almost has to manifest itself in a physical way, in a type of pain that you can no longer ignore. Again, connecting some dots here, because even with people in my life where suddenly something has flared so badly that then there is no option but to slow down. There's no option but that.
They can't get up. I mean, I've worked with multimillionaires who are used to flying around the world, suddenly can't get out of bed.
Wow.
Can't get off the sofa.
Wow.
People have sat in their cars, cannot move, can't get to the train station, can't get to the airport.
Wow.
And it's a very high price to pay for the drive. So the inner brutality is there at play, driving people, and it doesn't have to be that way. So it's great. It's good news in a way.
Yes, it is great news, and I'm so happy we're talking about it, because I think another thing that people see is other people being so successful. Sorry, I have to stop using that word successful, like it's, we know success is a very different thing for different people, but flying on planes, being in different countries, and you watch this and you go, well, if they're doing it, I can be capable of doing it. I'm lazy. I'm not keeping up. And actually, the more we talk about it, and we talk about the fact that it's actually not sustainable, people are actually suffering behind the scenes, actually starts to break this down. And that's what I love about some of what we're talking about today, because we're giving people, like you said, be kind to yourself. This is not all as it seems.
The kindness, the thing is about the kindness and companionability is it's not a luxury. If you go against yourself, there's an internal split, and that's why people will do things in life that don't really suit them. They'll override what their needs are because the inner brutality is winning. If you wire in kindness and companionability to self, you can have all of what you want. Success, how you see it, which is right. Everybody's success is individual, but the thing is that the brutality will injures people. So that's what the trauma continuum is that the inner brutality creates trauma from the inside out. And the world, we know there's enough trauma outside, let alone us doing it to ourselves. Absolutely. And you don't know when the rupture's going to happen. Whereas if you're kindly and companionable to yourself, you'll never rupture unless the world does something to you. And you'll still be more resilient and resourceful when that happens. That makes sense.
That really does make sense.
So for CEOs, entrepreneurs, it's like giving somebody a fuel tank. Here's a fuel tank, and you're going to be okay. You'll manage absolutely everything because you haven't already gone against yourself. Spending a third of your day trying to overcome yourself.
And all the energy that takes, and all of the back and forth in your mind that takes, can be actually exhausting.
And do you know what's a really interesting thing as well? When I was studying, before I wrote the book, I studied past clients' work for 8 years.
Wow.
And the people that had done the work with me, which was very kind of them, I mean, hopefully they got loads out of it, and they still write to me and say they're doing great, profits are going up, or they're just really happy and content in their leadership. But each one of them, and obviously they didn't even know each other, I asked all of them, how much energy do you think that doing this work has given you? And they all said 30%.
Wow.
I know, and I really wish I should have done a proper research paper on it, because that was anecdotal, but nobody said 25, 27, 33, all said 30%. You think, oh crikey, if that's like getting 3 more extra hours a day.
Yeah, it is.
Right? It's a lot of hours per month. That you're not if you're not fighting yourself already.
I feel like I've been on this journey for a little while of trying to just be kinder, letting go. I mean, part of this podcast is that. Let go of the perfectionism, let go of the ideals that society has placed on your family, whatever it might be. And you start to realize exactly that it doesn't have to be the number of hours you put in is the amount of success you see. These things are not directly correlated. There are other things at play here. And it's such a liberating and wonderful way to live. And I wish I tapped into it sooner, but I'm pleased I've tapped into it now, because I'm sure people you work with haven't still not tapped into it and are probably in their 50s, 60s,
Yeah.
and got a huge amount of their life really punishing themselves, which I'm sure is very hard for you to see, but then very rewarding to get them out of that pattern.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. People don't often get to this until their 50s or 60s. Well, 40s, 50s and 60s. And you then, if you're trying to rewire your inner brutality at that age, first of all, it takes a longer time, but the grieving that you've got to do, because the inner brutality has been there for 3, 4, 5 decades, right?
It's a sense of self. It's a sense of who you are.
Yeah. I've got, the way I help people is I say, look, ask yourself these questions. This kindness and companionability is so important. Really, really important. And I say to people, look, if you've got a big decision to make, always ask yourself, does this look after me? It might be what you want, but does it look after me? And the other big question I say is, does your life look and feel like yours? And you can ask yourself that a dozen times a day if you want to, because if you find that you could get attention, or, oh gosh, I'm not doing what I want to do, there's something else I want to do, I'm in this and I hate it, but I feel like I need to. It's a really simple question. Does your life look and feel like yours?
Yeah. That's a really powerful question.
Usually people go,
yeah, I feel like that's one
question.
of those questions that then you can go this way or you can go this way. It's that life-defining moment where you have to stop, you have to take a look. This happened, this exact point in my life came. So I remember the business was doing great. It's actually probably one of the heights of our business just prior to the world shutting down. And I just had my daughter and she was about 9 months old. And I had gone back to work and I was on autopilot. I was being the perfectionist. I'd gone back to work 6 weeks after labour. Straight in, back to the office, emails, everything functioning. I'm good. I've got this. And just before the world actually shut down, I started journaling as just something. I needed a tool. And I remember reading back on what I'd written about a year later. And on the outside, I was projecting, I'm great, I'm fine, I love my life, I love my job, my company's growing. And, I was projecting all of this. And I remember reading back these words, which I'd written and never said out loud, of, I don't want to go into work. I just want to be with my daughter. I feel so unhappy. But I suppressed. And even as I wrote those words, it was only until a year later that I actually read them out loud and went, what?
wow.
And it's our ability, I guess, to just
Override,
exactly. And that's why a lot of what you're saying is really hitting home. And I think we'll hit home with a lot of people, because it will be different areas in people's lives that they're just overriding, just suppressing. Everything is fine. I'm doing great.
Yeah, and I think there are times in our life, parenting is one of them, isn't there? Where it's high energy. You have to do things that you don't want to do sometimes. And so we will have to override what we need and want at times. But if that becomes your way in the world, you're going to get poorly.
Yeah.
And also you just deserve a little bit more.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people are going against this word deserving, but majority of us are deserving of the nicest life possible.
Absolutely.
Right?
Am I allowed to ask for it? And also that looks different for everybody, right? So like you said, for some people it might be a multi-million pound business, flying around, whatever. For other people it might just be being at home with their kids.
Yeah.
And having the freedom to do that and working the hours, having the freedom to choose hours that they want to work. And so being able to define, I think, what your idea of success looks like early on.
For sure. I mean, you've hit it on the head as well. Like, choosing always reduces the sense of entrapment.
Yes.
Any sense of entrapment creates trauma itself, right? So if you're stuck in a job that you hate, for example, or in a relationship that you hate, or anywhere that is suffocating your desires, your wants, and your potential, and even your safety, you're going to become traumatized by it. So, I will work with people who've perhaps been running a business for 20 years And then they'll turn up and say, I didn't really feel like I chose it. I didn't enjoy any of it. Yes, it's making great money. What am I doing? How do I get out of this?
Yeah. And it's never too late to get out, because I want to give people hope.
Never. Honestly, I suppose the oldest person I've worked with was 75. Majority of people I work with are between 40 and 60. Wow. And and they're amazing. Like, they're the cleverest minds, and they're in great pain.
Yeah.
They're in great pain, and you see, because it's labelled in a brutality, you have to be very careful people don't blame themselves for that. But that's just the offshoot of somebody trying to metabolize a world inside their mind and their body, and it's tough.
It's really tough. And we just had a podcast episode that we've shot already that is about life beginning at 40, which is why what you're saying is just so refreshing and hopeful, because we can start again whenever we want. We can start again at 40. Like, now we are working until 70. And actually, if you're doing something you love, and I'm guessing like your type of career where you are coaching us, you probably can imagine yourself doing this until you can't do it anymore. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because now I'm not wasting energy going against myself. And, I've become my own dynamo now. And it's a pleasure. And, I got a mortgage at 48. So life begins at 50 now.
Life begins at 50.
And for me, life begins every single day.
Yeah.
And the biggest privilege of my life is to say, what do I want to do today? And that not being written in stone, and that I can choose.
Yeah.
And if you've got choice, you've got freedoms.
Yeah.
And not everybody can say that, right?
And it just takes work to get there, to get to that point.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any difference in women versus men? And I only ask that because I think, again, from a familial sense or a society sense, we are raised slightly, maybe not everyone, but most people are raised slightly differently. I've got 2 little girls. And so
Me too.
Oh, so
big girls.
2 big girls, yeah. A bit further along than I am. But yeah, so we've got girls. And so I'm very hyper aware of the language I use with them, how I speak to them, because I want them to believe they can do anything. And, even my husband works and I work, we want to set that example of 2 working parents for them, just so they can see that. Have you seen anything like that when you work with female clients versus male clients, or do the same things show up and gender is actually irrelevant?
I don't think we're in the day and age that it can be irrelevant.
Okay.
Yet.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. But I think, again, you've got your familial narrative, your community narrative, and your societal narrative. And so women still are mostly brought up to be the looker after us. Yeah. Okay, so that gets wired into them. So their sense of self is to often be in service without them realizing it, right? So their inner brutality gets constructed as though their job is to be here to lift others. So when they're asking to be lifted up, or they lift themselves up and elevate themselves, they're having to go against a pervasive narrative that's not for you to do. And even if it's not said, it's palpable.
You say things so well. That's exactly what it is, to be in service.
Yeah.
And it's just there always.
Right. So one of the narratives was, oh, she's never about herself. She's all about everybody else. So when the woman entrepreneur, for example, goes against that and becomes about themselves, the narrative is it's all about her. Not that she's going to create a company where there's going to be 1,000 people employed. It's all about her. Whereas a man, the narrative for the man is, look at him being a good employer. Yeah. Right? Because we're supposed to be the uplifters of others and the ones that do the emotional work for others. Yes. Right? So it's I mean, that's a whole pod in itself.
It's a whole pod in itself, and why did I get to it so late in the episode? But it's just the things you've commented on there hit home. They really do. And I think becoming a parent becomes a whole other dynamic in your life as a woman, because now career ambition to the side, you've got a whole new role and it's a turning point in your life, whether you want to believe it or not.
Yeah.
If the work can actually come in as soon as you're entering that phase, I think the earlier that comes in, the better, because you're redefining
Yeah.
your values, your sense of success, who you are, how you're going to manage all of this. Because honestly, I don't think I understood it until I was well into it. Exactly. I mean, maybe no one does. And maybe that's the naivety and beauty of it, is that if you overthink it, maybe you wouldn't do it in the first place. But
That's true.
yeah, because it's an alarming amount of, an alarming amount of work, and it's a complete, you're rewriting yourself completely, aren't you?
Yeah. And again, if you do the inner brutality work before you have children,
Oh, gosh.
Again, you don't pass it on to them also.
Kids will get the best of you.
Yeah,
Goodness.
absolutely. I mean, look, there is no perfection, particularly in parenting. But if you're not wasting your energy going against yourself and you're not passing that on, because your children will pick that up.
Yeah.
Right? They'll pick up that if you dislike yourself, if you're working yourself into the ground. Horrible saying, isn't that?
Yeah.
It took me years to realise what that actually meant.
Yes.
It's awful.
It's awful.
But it's true.
It's actually the exact thing that does
Yeah,
happen.
it actually is it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so this inner brutality work, the companionability work, like I work with my children on it all the time. We've been through horrible trauma that changed their lives dramatically, and mine. And I could hear their own brutality coming out, and I try to, I try to help them as much as I possibly can with not going against self. Have your emotions, have all of your emotions. You don't need to turn them against yourself.
Yeah.
That's different. Feeling them's fine because you can't get your feelings wrong.
Yeah. And I'd love to, I guess, for people that don't have access to Anna Pinkerton, they are not in that position in their lives where they can necessarily get a coach, and because it is a beautiful privilege to have in your life if you're able to have that. What can you leave them with that is very actionable and real, either to help them identify something that maybe they are, and we've covered that a little bit, but straight through to exercises, maybe things that you give your children that you instilled in them from a really young age. But I'd love people to start living the kind of life.
Yeah.
And rather than us just talking about it in a broad sense, giving them something that's very tangible and real.
You're right. Okay, great question. I mean, I say to myself as well, by the way, there's no perfection. Like here, I'm practicing this myself every day as well. I've almost got there. I've got about 1% to do. Yeah. But I don't think we ask ourselves what we want enough. Yeah. Like just what do I want? And create choice points throughout the day. Is it sparkling water or still? Like, what do I want? So that you're starting to build a relationship with yourself. Not just what am I going to do? What am I going to have? What do I want? What do I want in the next half an hour? What do I want in the next hour? Really make it small and chunk it down, because then you're creating lots of little bits of evidence for the brain that you're doing what will look after it. Yes. The subconscious is always listening. So if you're giving yourself choices, even when you might not have many, and you might be having a terrible time in life, just ask yourself, am I doing what I want? What do I want next? Even if you're in a cul-de-sac and you feel like there's no choices, what do you want in the next 10 minutes? That's really important. It's brain training.
And our brain just soaks up whatever we give it, right?
Yeah.
So our brain is just whatever we're feeding into our brain is what it's absorbing.
Yeah.
And I used to think of that as like a really horrifying thought. I now think of it as one of the most empowering thoughts, because we can retrain our brain at any time. I
know, absolutely. You really absolutely can. And I think I say in that you can teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah, you absolutely can. The other thing I'd say is really be careful about the language you use for yourself. Don't swear at yourself. Don't call yourself names. Just be gentle and kindly in the way that you speak to yourself. How is it that I came to that conclusion? Why did I make that mistake? That's okay. And you look at it with curiosity and gentleness, because if you look at it with from a brutal lens, all that will do is create that split inside yourself. So kindly, companionable, don't hurt yourself with your own words. Just be curious and wonder.
Yourself,
because it uses energy, it entraps you, takes your freedoms away, and again you're in that cul-de-sac, and the less freedoms and choices you have, the more likely you're living with adversity without realizing it. Yeah. And then chronic adversity leads to trauma. So it's all related.
Everything's related.
It's all related, yeah.
And you can catch it at any time and turn it around.
Anytime you can catch it.
I love that. I just saw this thing about like whatever situation you're in right now, we have different ways we can approach it. And you've literally just hit the nail on the head there with curiosity, because it just said we can either approach the situation angry, judgmental, whatever, or you can just approach it with curiosity and gratitude. And if you can approach it with curiosity and gratitude, you're going to open up a world of possibility, a world of intrigue, a world of potential that you didn't even know was there. And that can be, you can say no to the situation, or you can say yes, but you're being curious about it. I think
so. I think that the gratitude from where I would be sitting is that you've got the ability to be curious in the first place, yes. And you're not entrapped and stuck and stifled. So, because gratitude is an experience, as a process,
yeah.
rather than a decision.
Yeah.
So, but if you could be grateful for like, oh, can I just be wondrous about this? Yeah, I have a choice here.
Yeah.
So again, you just chop it all down, make it small.
Yeah.
Because asking somebody to have a gratitude mindset, that's enormous. Like, that's going to take months, if not years, to get to. But they could be grateful for going, oh, was I okay with that decision?
Oh, and I want to get into that, but we don't have time, Anna, because again, I think gratitude is thrown around a lot, as though we should just wake up one day and be filled with gratitude.
I know. I know.
It's like, this isn't just something that you...
It's like forgiveness.
Yeah.
Forgiveness is a process, so is gratitude a process. It's not a decision.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it just becomes words, right?
And we have no time to cover it today, but it's a good thought to leave with. It's a good thought to leave it to, again, not beat yourself up for not being filled with gratitude every second of the day, and just breaking it down, like you said, into these half-hour segments and asking yourself, what do you want? Being curious.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying is like it's staying in relationship with yourself.
Yes.
So it's not decision. It's being in that dynamic relationship that's hopefully kindly and companionable to you, and then all of these ideas and coming to decisions is easier, just a nicer place to reside. Yeah. I think that's what you're saying.
I think that is perfectly what I'm saying. And you've been so eloquent in this conversation, and so many phrases you've given me have actually been exactly what I've been thinking, and hopefully what our listeners have been thinking, and going, actually, I've been in that cycle, or that's what I do to myself, or I come from a place of service all the time, which is why I then get frustrated. It's just little things that are really happening in real time now, which is why it's been so helpful. So we are, obviously, the podcast is called Superwoman Is It Real, because we don't believe in the concept of Superwoman. We don't believe that anyone is perfect, and actually leaning into our imperfections makes us better and stronger individuals. But in keeping with that, we do believe everyone has their own superpower, and I love that as a liberating thought, that we all have something that makes us uniquely us, and it's different for each of us. So Anna, if you could choose any one superpower that you want to give yourself that you already know that you haven't possessed, and there's a few things that come to my mind for you, but you probably might have one, and actually, great way to beat down any inner brutality here and be kind to yourself.
Isn't it?
Something lovely. What would it be?
Do you know, that's a great question, and I don't think anybody's asked me that before either. I do have a secret superpower, and I don't have bad thoughts about people.
That's lovely.
I just genuinely don't have bad thoughts about people.
That's an amazing superpower.
It's also, it can be a weakness, but actually, on the whole, I think it's a superpower.
The amount of hours and time you are saving your brain from not thinking negatively about other people, it's a huge superpower.
Great. I'll take
amazing.
it. I'll take it. I love that one.
If
Then
more people had that superpower, just imagine what a kind planet and world we'd be living in.
Exactly.
And I think most of us are training ourselves to get to that superpower, if anything, because it's a waste of energy and time. I can't believe we've been talking for so long. I mean, there's I'm going to have you back at some point because there's still so much to cover. But thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Thank
you for having me.
Yeah, I mean, I love that we talked about a lot of this stuff, and I love the book My Kinder Life, which is the play on living a kinder
Exactly.
life, which is something that I think we can all benefit from. Doesn't matter what position or CEO or entrepreneur, stay-at-home mum, it's for everyone.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Anna.
You're welcome.
And to follow Anna, we're going to put her social media handles here as well, so you can follow her, stay up to date with her journey, and get your hands on this book.